welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a horror movie review and I'll be having a look at Damned by Dawn. So this is an Australian horror flick, and if you notice the title, it has some similarities to the sort of tagline from Evil Dead. And that's not the only thing it shares with Evil Dead. It's obviously trying to kind of ape maybe the sort of style of the sort of the original Sam Raimi films, at least, with the sort of the camera work. And there's a couple of lines which are very similar to what was said in an Evil Dead and things like that. Not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, I'm just pointing it out. The basic story here is a woman returns to her kind of family home in this sort of Australian outback somewhere to introduce her sort of new boyfriend to her family ultimately, and visit her sort of father, her grandmother and sister and things like that while she's there. We're sort of told, we pretty much get the impression that her grandmother is pretty much on her death's bed, so this is going to be the sort of the final sort of farewell for her ultimately. And what ultimately happens is the family somehow angers a kind of local spirit who is this sort of wailing banshee woman, and ends up sort of getting attacked by her and a kind of demon, undead, zombie, flying skeleton army. That's right. Okay, when I started watching this film, I thought this was going to be really good. It starts off really well, I have to say. It has an absolutely fantastic, eerie, foreboding atmosphere. As I said, the camera work is reminiscent of Evil Dead, and it kind of really does help in that sort of spooky, scary sort of feeling that you're getting from it. And we get some great sort of shots of sort of stuff moving around in the background. It's not quite in focus. You can't quite make it out. Some great sort of like misty woods and stuff like that as well. So some really good sort of atmospheric work done in this sort of, I suppose, the initial quarter of this movie. However, what I was surprised about, the actual kind of, I guess, the main female ghost who you'll kind of see in the cover actually comes into this sort of fairly early, and we get good looks at her fairly early on in the film, which I was quite surprised about, because normally they kind of save it a little bit towards the end of the film, but we get it pretty early on. And from there, unfortunately, it starts to kind of go down a little bit. I think the essential premise of the actual kind of the main sort of ghost or whatever she is, the Banshee, is actually quite good. She never sort of speaks. All she does is scream these like really kind of high-pitched sort of supernatural screams, which, you know, I can imagine if you were sat in the same room and that she started screaming at you, you'd absolutely crap your pants. However, the story kind of turned into a bit of a confusing mess, to be honest with you. Kind of, I guess, the main heroine sort of fights back, and the kind of the female Banshee sort of responds by bringing up all these flying zombies, which are just really weird. They're really bad CGI for the most part as well. And we have these sort of flying skeletons, basically, just sort of attacking the sort of family members and sort of, you know, killing them off one by one. But it just looks really bizarre. All the good work that was done in the first quarter, it kind of builds up this great sort of spooky atmosphere. Unfortunately, it's just undone, because it just goes into like a real cheesy mess, and it's kind of almost more of an action film rather than a horror film sort of later on. There are a couple of reasonable sort of practical effect shots, and some sort of creepy moments here and there throughout the film. But to be honest with you, once you sort of see the CGI flying skeletons, your kind of interest just absolutely dips out, unfortunately, which is a real shame. I felt this film had some real promise to it. I also got to say the acting wasn't particularly good. There was some of the reactions and stuff to what's actually going on, and I guess you can blame the scripts for that as well, to be honest with you. But the acting, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't anything to write home about. There were certain scenes where I thought it was okay, but to be honest, for the most part, the acting was, I would say, subpar. So overall, I was disappointed with this film, because it kind of I didn't know anything about it, to be honest with you. The cover looked kind of cool. And when I first started watching, I thought, man, this is going to be a pretty decent film. However, I was disappointed. Anyway, let me know what you thought of it. Leave me a comment, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.